Kubernetes is one of the most sought out skills, or one of the skills which recruiters are looking out for when sourcing talent for DevOps or cloud computing or site reliability engineer roles. And by default, there are a lot of questions which recruiters usually ask as far as Kubernetes is concerned. Many people are actually scared studying Kubernetes, or they have difficulties playing around Kubernetes. In today's video, I'll be answering a lot of questions around Kubernetes. High-level questions which I feel if you can go through the experience with me, you will be able to have a good conversation during your experience or sharing your experience with Kubernetes. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are not yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button and get yourself subscribed. Also hit the notification bell because a lot of videos are coming up like these to make your journey smooth. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for being there for our content. And equally, there is the link to my channel description, my Slack channel description, where I share a lot of resources to help your DevOps and cloud computing journey. So you want to click on that link and join our community right away. Now, I guess by now you should know what Kubernetes is, and it's one of the most important services as far as a successful DevOps implementation is concerned, because Kubernetes covers the area of microservices and microservice deployments in any given cloud environment. So recruiters are looking out to know your expertise with Kubernetes and setting up Kubernetes in a cloud or cloud native or cloud agnostic environment. And I'll be answering some of those key questions which, if you can put that together, you get yourself a good conversation during your interview. The very first question on Kubernetes is how you have been able to perform auto-scaling in your Kubernetes cluster. And when mentioning your experience with configuring or with setting up auto-scaling functionality in Kubernetes cluster, there are different types of scalability or scaling actions which you should take into consideration. By now you should know auto-scaling helps you to manage your resources in a given deployment on the cloud. So by auto-scaling functionality, you want to make sure that a given target or a given desired capacity of resources are available to serve your application traffic. And based on your auto-scaling function, you can decrease or increase the number of compute resources to meet your traffic requirements. So on the Kubernetes deployment, the key aspects of auto-scaling are you talking about cluster auto-scaling for the provisioning or for the addition and deletion of cluster node pods to meet traffic requirements in your Kubernetes deployment, or you talking about pod auto-scaling, the addition or deletion of pods to meet the requirements of your cluster or to meet the requirements of your application. Now we have the three main autoscalers. We have the cluster autoscaler for, like I said, node scaling. We have the horizontal pod autoscaler that has to manage pod creation, like addition of new pods or deletion of some pods to meet traffic requirements. And then we equally have the vertical pod autoscaler. So once you're being asked in your interview to experience or to express your experience with autoscaling in a Kubernetes deployment, you're looking out to talk about cluster autoscaling, vertical pod autoscaling, and horizontal pod autoscaling, because those are the three main ways which you can use to perform autoscaling functionality in your Kubernetes deployment. So master your Kubernetes autoscaling functionality very well. The second most important question is security of your Kubernetes cluster. How have you been able to secure your Kubernetes deployment or your Kubernetes cluster setup? And putting aside maybe the infrastructure side of security, like if you're on AWS cloud, you're securing, maybe using your network access control list for VPC level security, or your web access firewalls, or your security groups for your Kubernetes deployments, and so on. At the level of the Kubernetes cluster, you're looking at specific technologies for or specific deployments to meet the function of security. And the most important is you using the principle of role-based access control. Right, so you want to talk about using role-based access control to manage user access to certain services or certain deployments or certain ports or to certain configurations in your Kubernetes cluster. So role-based access control, RBAC, is one of the major ways which you can use to manage security along your Kubernetes cluster deployments. And equally, you can set up encryption policies between resources in your various node pods. So you have role-based access control. You could set up security, you could set up encryption policies between several resources in your node pods. And lastly, you can carry out incremental or rolling update checks on the container images that are being deployed in your Kubernetes cluster. Remember, your container images might be coming from a continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, maybe through Jenkins. So you want to make sure you constantly check your Jenkins file that will definitely be built to produce a container image, maybe that will push your repository or Docker or whatever the case might be. So you performing constant check for security vulnerabilities of your container images is one of the ways which you can put in a good security posture for your Kubernetes cluster. Now, the third very important question which you can be asked as far as Kubernetes is concerned is how will you integrate Kubernetes with a continuous integration and continuous deployment system? In our case, maybe how will you integrate Kubernetes with Jenkins or with any other continuous integration and continuous deployment system? And when you've been asked how you can integrate Kubernetes with any CI/CD system, the very first thing that should come to your mind is you performing Kubernetes deployments through Kubernetes declarative and Kubernetes imperative commands. By you using Kubernetes imperative commands, that means you can install Kubernetes plugin in your Jenkins server where you'll be using declarative commands like kubectl create. You can create whatever resource you want as far as using kubectl commands are concerned. Or alternatively, you can use your Jenkins pipeline. Of course, you can go to your Jenkins pipeline syntax and get the syntax for deployment of Kubernetes manifest in your pipeline. You can use your Jenkins declarative command to implement or to deploy certain Kubernetes manifest during build runtime. By that, if you have maybe a deployment manifest or you have a configuration map or you have a service manifest or whatever manifest file you have in your Jenkins or in your Jenkins directory, with the usage of kubectl apply, you can apply those manifest files in your Jenkins pipeline, right? So once you get, maybe if you use Git as your source code management to get your application code files from Git, and then you want to integrate them to your build. Now, once the Git files or once the Kubernetes manifest files are in the directory of your Jenkins build server, you can then use Kubernetes declarative commands to apply those files. So with kubectl apply maybe deployment.yaml or services.yaml or rback.yaml or whatever manifest file you've written in your Jenkins deployment. So that is the way which you can use to deploy Kubernetes infrastructure on Jenkins. First, you can use the Kubernetes plugins where you specify in your tool section you're using Kubernetes, and then you write Kubernetes declarative commands, or you can use Kubernetes manifest files where you use Kubernetes imperative commands like kubeapply to apply given manifest files. So that is how you integrate Jenkins to Kubernetes or Kubernetes to Jenkins. Now, the next very important question which you can be asked as far as Kubernetes is concerned is how you perform monitoring and logging in your Kubernetes cluster. How you perform monitoring and logging in your Kubernetes cluster. And as far as monitoring and logging is concerned in Kubernetes, you want to talk about you collecting metrics, Kubernetes metrics that are particular to your deployments, right? We are talking about CPU utilization, we are talking about memory utilization, we are talking about resource utilization in your Kubernetes cluster. After you collect such metrics, you then feed them as targets in your Prometheus configuration. Of course, you can deploy Prometheus as a deployment in Kubernetes, so you can use Prometheus, you can get the Prometheus manifest file and you deploy Prometheus to collect logs or to collect those metrics in your Kubernetes cluster. And now, after you've been able to collect those metrics from your Kubernetes cluster where your ports or your services will be targets for your Prometheus, you then use those metrics to display in a dashboard where Grafana comes in, right? So you're collecting metrics, CPU utilization, memory utilization, resource utilization as a whole, and then you're integrating those metrics as targets, or you're integrating your pods or your services as targets for your Prometheus where the logs are being collected, and then you use a service like Grafana to dashboard or to display the current state of your resource or of your cluster in dashboards, right? So when you're talking about monitoring and logging in Kubernetes, you're focusing on collecting metrics with Prometheus and then displaying those metrics on a dashboard with a service like Grafana. So those are the key services that should come to your mind as far as monitoring is concerned. You can equally make mention of the usage of CloudWatch, that is if you are using the EKS, the Elastic Kubernetes service on AWS. I hope these videos have been helpful to give you a very kickstart or to help you prepare for your interview as far as Kubernetes is concerned. hit the subscribe button if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, please. And if you're a returning subscriber, hit the notification bell, and equally join my community on Slack and get access to those resources that will help you further. Check out our video on services which you should know when going for an interview, especially AWS services, and our other videos that have to do with common interview questions. See you in the next video.